This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Serpents in the Bible, or are they dragons? That's this week. Iron and Myth, straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Imagine a wave of terror attacks across our country. Unexpected, shocking, deadly, and provoked by a single email. The government responds with lockdowns and lockups of anyone with unapproved ideas, and they add in mandatory vaccines. That's the premise behind my novel, The God Conspiracy, and your response to our special offer in the month of August was so overwhelming, and we are grateful for that we've decided to extend it. The God Conspiracy plus the theology behind the novel, 12 hours of our video teachings taken from presentations we've recorded over the last 5 years. 12 hours of video in all on 4 DVDs, all together, a $120 value. We're offering it to you during the month of September for just $35 plus shipping and handling. It's a compelling story that I hope you appreciate, but more than that, the video teachings on the long supernatural war in which we all play a part, from Eden to Armageddon. Take advantage of it now. Available online at the Gilbert House store, only gilberthouse.org, and we thank you for your prayers and your support. Dragons are make-believe, or at least that's what we've been taught. And yet the word for dragon shows up in the Bible a lot more often, dozens of times throughout Scripture. So God is calling them dragons. Why are we so reluctant to use that term? Where does it come from? Why the ancient world's fascination with serpents and dragons? And are some members of the spirit realm, God's throne guardians, serpentine in appearance? That's this week's discussion. Joining me for our monthly Iron and Myth session, pastor and author of the books Giants, Sons of the Gods, Conspiracy Theory, and The Angel of the Lord, a biblical, historical, and theological study, among others. Pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, Colorado, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, and best-selling author, award-winning screenwriter, author of the series that we recommend, Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, nonfiction books based on the theology behind the fiction series, and the writer of a new film that is going to debut September 7th. We'll talk about that in just a minute. My Son, Hunter. It's going to get him in trouble. Brian Godawa. Gentlemen, we're down a man tonight as Judd Burton is under the weather, but thank you for making time in your schedule to join us. First off, fellows, before we jump into the topic tonight, just a word of prayer. We did this prior to recording for our brother Judd Burton. He's a little under the weather tonight, so we'll be missing his insight and his expertise. But Brian, you're about to become the center of the maelstrom here very soon. September 7th, the movie My Son Hunter, which you wrote, will be released. As of just a few minutes ago, when I looked at the trailer again, it's been viewed 2.7 million times.
Whoa, dude, seriously?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Actually, this is very relevant to our topic tonight, the serpent. Yeah. So, I'm excited about it, and it's getting around. It's causing some controversy and one of the reasons why is when you watch the trailer, it's really done well. You can see, oh, this is a quality movie. This isn't the typical, conservative, cheap, rip-off type things. This is a very unique edge to it. You can see it even in the trailer. We've got this satirical, comedic edge, but there's also facts, and it's done well. And so I'm excited about it. And yeah, it opens September 7th. People can pre-order it at mysonhunter.com. There's no theatrical release, of course, because no distributor in Hollywood would take that movie, right?
Yeah.
And then we ended up getting Breitbart.com to be the distributor. So, but as I understand, you can go pre-order the DVD or online, I believe. You can obviously watch it online when it comes out September 7th, but you can go to mysonhunter.com to get that information. And there was one thing I wanted to say about that.
I got to say, it's really awesome that Lawrence Fox is playing that role, because he's an actor that I've liked for a long time, going back to his role in, one of the police procedurals from the UK. But he's
wow.
So he's always been a really good actor. And what was the film or the series that he was in?
Well, he was in Victoria. He played Lord Palmerston, who was kind of like the Donald Trump of 18th century England, you know? So he's kind of interesting. He's a great actor. And truthfully, he plays Hunter Biden, and John James, who is famous for being Jeff Colby on The Dynasty, he plays Joe Biden, and they are phenomenal. And it's a hard thing to do because, you know, when you think about this, you're about to make this movie that nobody in Hollywood would touch. So you got to get actors who have the guts, the courage to stand up. Now, it was a great script, and people loved it, but, you know, doing this will probably lose your career. So these guys already didn't care, and they've already stepped out and stood up and spoken up. So they were fine, but it's hard. So imagine, you know, like when you watch some Hollywood movie where they do the movie on Sarah Palin or the movie against Trump, the Comey rules, all that kind of garbage. Well, they got the pick of the litter, and they've got the best actors in Hollywood willing to play these roles and look just like them. So in some ways, I think it was a blessing that we were able to find such great actors to fit. You know, you're not going to fit perfectly the look. The goal is not to look exactly like them. The goal is it's not even to reproduce all their little nuances. You try to do that, but it's to try to capture the spirit of a character and to make you be drawn in. Because John James, like Lawrence Fox, looks a lot like Hunter, but John James is a little bit huskier, obviously, than the thin Biden. You know, he kind of has a little bit of look, but being huskier, and he's got a huskier voice. That was my big concern. Is like, you know, he doesn't have that weaker voice that Biden has. But you know what? When you watch him, you get absorbed, you get pulled in, and you believe it. You believe it that he's Biden for this story, and he doesn't have to, you know, sound exactly like him in order to recreate a character with all his flaws as well as his strengths. Mm-hmm.
Inspector Lewis was not to derail a conversation right there after some great commentary, but Inspector Lewis, it was driving me nuts, and I had to look it up. That was the show we used to watch over here. And the Frankenstein Chronicles with Sean Bean. So, you know, again, Lawrence Fox has done some really, really interesting things. But
he's fantastic. In fact, he is the best in this movie of all the actors on there. You know, he is the best in terms of he captured the character that I wrote just phenomenally. You know, what I mean by that is it's not just, the emotional display, et cetera. The other element of this, it's a satire. And by the way, since our audience is, you know, predominantly going to be Christians, beware, it's rated R. There's language, sexuality, and a lot of drugs, a lot of language. There's no nudity, but there is all that stuff. But I always tell Christians, look, it's not for everyone. And if that's too much for you, fine. But if you can handle reading Ezekiel chapter 16 and Ezekiel chapter 23, where God describes, you know, Samaria and Israel and Judah, right? Mm-hmm. As the twin sisters getting raped and having sex with everybody on the street, you know, that kind of a thing. If you can handle that, you understand that the vulgarity, if it's properly used prophetically, it is the most potent image for communicating corruption, literally. I mean, and then of course that's what we're talking about is corruption, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a satire. And so what's so good about the Hunter character is what's his name again?
Lawrence Fox.
Lawrence, yeah. Sorry. Lawrence Fox is so brilliant because he captures the seriousness, the pathos of that character, but he has comedic timing that's perfect because I wrote a lot of subtle sort of satire in there, right? And he picked it up and he just nails it perfectly. So he's got that wide breadth of pathos to comedy. And I think people are going to really love it. But yeah, beware. It is vulgar, but it is vulgar in a prophetic sense. So its ultimate goal is truth.
Well, that's one of the reasons that Sharon and I, when we've recommended programs for Christians who want to understand where we're going prophetically, shows like Altered Carbon, which I think really illustrates the depravity of the transhumanist movement, or Westworld for that matter. What will humans be like when we think there are no consequences to our actions? That's what you get, but you can't you wouldn't want to sit children down in front of that and watch them because of the violence and the sex, which is gratuitous in the sense of the people. If these were real people, they were just living lives that have no real purpose or meaning because they think there is no real purpose or meaning and no consequences. So why not do anything and everything? Because otherwise, you live forever and you run out of things. You get bored. But
and, there's something else too about this dealing with, and again, there's limits, and you can't, you don't want to be pornographic and all that. Right. So it's a gray area. But the idea is you have to accurately depict the sin or the depravity, or your message of redemption will have no power. Because and showing the self-destruction, where that leads to, that's the violence and the destruction of human beings and people. But that's the kind of thing that these kind of stories have the power to really communicate. And we have to keep that in mind when we're watching this, because if you don't accurately depict that destruction or its consequences, then your message of redemption won't be believable to people.
Yeah. Saved from what? Saved from having a good time is what, sadly, what most people think.
1970s TV villain, nah.
Yeah.
It's got to be a real villain. Yeah.
Well, the villain in the story of the Bible is clearly the dragon. The only place in the New Testament where that word in Greek, drakon, is even used is in the book of Revelation, where it refers to Satan, the big red dragon. But in the Hebrew Old Testament, there are a number of words that can be translated as dragon. They're usually not. Often translated as serpent, sometimes as jackal. But the question I had, and this is something Sharon and I kind of dealt with a bit in our book, Giants, Gods, and Dragons. If God says there are dragons, and there are dragons who represent the primordial chaos, which we talked about on our previous program, and the dragon who represents the ultimate end times enemy, or at least the leader of the ultimate rebellion, Satan. Why do we shy away from the use of that word in the Bible? I mean, how can we tell when the word translated from Hebrew into English is appropriately serpent or has been desupernaturalized and should have been dragon? What role does a dragon play, and what's the fascination with dragons in cultures from ancient Mesopotamia to modern China?
Yeah, I think that this is another good example. There's so many of these, as we've often discovered, examples of how biblical translation is done by human beings who have biases. And I think it's not an anti-supernatural bias. It's a fear of looking mythological. For the same reason why they transliterate Nephilim instead of translating as giants, right? And this is another example, I think, that we see that a lot of these scholastic or academic translators, they're concerned of making it look too much like mythological literature. And of course, then they're missing the point of a lot of it, which is polemical, and intended to be symbolic. It's too bad. It's too bad. But that should be a cautionary tale for all of us, that we need to really be reading our English Bibles with caution, being aware that just what you read literally, because a lot of times I just believe what the plain reading of the Bible says. Yeah, well, unfortunately, the translation is not always a good plain translation, so you've got to be careful. This is one of those examples.
I was reading Isaiah 34 today, and I'm a bit behind in my Through the Bible in a year. So those of you who do that and get behind, you're not the only ones.
Even pastors.
That's exactly right. I came across this passage that I wrote about in the Giant book, and I'm reading through the ESV. And of all the translations, I really like the ESV in a lot of places. I think it does a great job. But in this, it's just ghastly. It's unbelievable. They have all these lists of names of creatures, and the ESV 100% says that they're just normal creatures. So jackals, wild goats,
ostriches,
night birds, hyenas, ostriches, those kinds of things. And when you go and you read almost any other translation, you'll get at least something that's supernatural. If you go and read like the Septuagint, you get monsters, devils, satyrs, howlings, and that's actually one of the places, Derek, where dragon appears in the Hebrew, the word tan.
Right.
And so it's just crazy. Like the King James will translate it as dragon. Septuagint translates it as monsters or sirens. And then the ESV goes with jackals. And it's just, in some ways, it's inexplicable. But I was having a conversation with some folks in church today, and we were talking about how it is that we don't seem to realize that we as Christians can be just as influenced by the culture as anybody else. And, you've got all these big movements of the 19th century, the Enlightenment and rationalism and evolutionary theory, materialism, all these things. And it's like we pride ourselves because we're young earth creationists or whatever, that we can't possibly be influenced by that. And yet here we are demythologizing what's like explicitly mythological language. You even have the Lilith shows up in that passage, and they refuse to translate her. She becomes the night bird. That's just unbelievable. And Brian's written some great poetic sort of imagery of Lilith in his books, and it's just like it blows you away. But we're susceptible to the demythologization of the scripture, just like anybody else.
I'm pretty sure that passage, or one of those two passages that address that. There's also the notion. It's the Lilith one. Which one is that?
It's
that's 34:14.
Yeah. So I also read one scholar that talked about how that the other creature could possibly be a snake at the bottom of the tree, which would be relevant to Lilith because of Ningishita was the famous serpent that followed, Lilith around. And so, there's some of those clear references there.
This is one of the reasons.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is one of the reasons that Sharon and I, in our weekly Bible study, have taken to reading the Septuagint as we go through to see what the Jewish religious scholars who translated that version 200 years before Jesus was born thought about the Old Testament. And you're right. I'm looking at the Lexham English Septuagint, which is a modern rendering into English. And I'd never heard this phrase before. Demons will meet donkey centaurs, and one will cry out to another. Yeah. There, donkey centaurs will rest. Donkey centaurs? Yeah. Wow. I mean, not regular horse centaurs, but donkey centaurs. Yeah, yeah. So, it's funny because like pulling back and looking at talking about the big picture first, when we were talking about this subject, what are we going to talk about and stuff. And, whenever I hear serpent, I always go, oh, because, it's so cliche, obviously, reptilian beings, in fact, like talking about it is just so cliche in our Western culture that it's a tired imagery. And we forget that, and I don't know if you guys read this book, but Charles Worth has written a book called The Good and Evil Serpent, and he chronicles sort of the ancient world concepts of that good and evil. And he's a humanist, and so most of what he points out is that we have to remember that the ancient Near Eastern world, the serpent was almost exclusively a positive image, and it represented knowledge and wisdom. And so when the Hebrew text comes out and has almost exclusively negative image, except for a couple, right? It was revolutionary, and it was literally polemical on so many of these counts. Obviously, the serpent in the garden, is the first, and most obvious example of that. And the not only the Gnostics, but way before, the serpent was considered the symbol of wisdom, even in ancient Egypt, right? Symbol of wisdom. And so the irony there is God saying, yeah, that serpent that you say is wisdom is actually the opposite, bringing your human, shall we say, the attempt of humanity to have autonomous knowledge apart from God, right? That is itself is the fall itself, So just sort of remembering that as we move forward,
It's interesting that you bring up Charles Worth. I had forgotten that he wrote that book. My mind went to a guy that I found about 10 years ago. He wrote about 200 years ago. A guy's name is John Bathurst Dean, and he was some sort of an Anglican pastor and wrote a couple of works, one called The Worship of the Serpent, traced throughout the world. And then he wrote a shorter piece on Dracontia, which are basically dragon temples. And so he's a Christian. And so it's interesting, Brian, that you talk about Charles Worth as kind of a humanist with his view. You go and read Dean, you get a completely different take on the history of the serpent religion throughout the world. And so, those presuppositions that we have when we come to the study can make all the difference in the world.
John Bathurst Dean, I want to write that down.
Yeah.
I had just read a paper by Charles Worth not long ago that looked at Genesis 3 and then compared it to Psalm 68 in using it to get some actual meaning out of Psalm 68 that most of our translations have skipped over. I mean, we're familiar with the aspect of the reference to the many-peaked mountain of Bashan. Why do you look with hatred or jealousy or whatever the phrase was over the mountain that God has chosen for his domain? God desired for his abode where the Lord will dwell forever. But then it goes on from there. But I think Charles Worth's point was that by not connecting Bashan and the fact that Bashan or Bethan in the Ugaritic literally meant serpent and was a cognate, as I think we mentioned during the program on chaos with the Akkadian chaos monster, Bashmu, the seven-headed chaos dragon that was defeated by Ninurta. You kind of miss the point. And he was trying to reconstruct, I think, Psalm 68, verse 22, where the Lord said, and this is the ESV now, I will bring them back from Bashan. I will bring them back from the depths of the sea. And the sea, of course, in Hebrew is Yam, which is another name that's sort of used interchangeably in the Ugaritic with Lotan, Leviathan, and Tanin, or dragon. So there appears to be something more connected to Psalm 68 or communicated in Psalm 68 than we've gotten out of it. And it's mainly because we don't understand what Bashan is. Most of us are satisfied with the the fat beasts of Bashan. Okay, Bashan was a great place to raise cattle then. Okay, the famous cattle of Bashan, yeah.
Right.
And really completely missing the point. And this is where Mike Heiser's work has been so, eye-opening, reversing Hermann. Oh, wait, Bashan was the entrance to the netherworld? Oh, it literally means place of the serpent? Yeah, but apparently even more than that. Again, the connection between Bashan and Bashmu, the chaos dragon, and perhaps even this verse in verse 22, there's a scholar by the name of Nicholas Wyatt, professor emeritus at University of Edinburgh, who renders that verse, from Bashan I shall bring back from the depths, Yam. God, in other words, prophesying a final defeat, perhaps, of this rebellious serpent. Not to drag us back into the chaos discussion, but anyway, that just triggered the memory because I'd seen the name Charles Worth recently as I was kind of digging through some stuff on Psalm 68. But again, most Bible teachers, most pastors who are looking at those verses, when they see the name Bashan, instead of taking it as like, this is a clue, I need to pay attention because there's something about that region, will just, oh yeah, cattle.
We need to do subversion on this modern world of humanists that have kind of like we go to Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, and like there's not a lot of evangelicals that are writing for that. But it's a fantastic dictionary because these guys aren't afraid to look at these words and define them the way that they are. And we could kind of go, well, why is that? And I have some ideas that maybe some of them, they think that it's, maybe they're kind of undermining the authority of Scripture by doing it. So I say it's time to take back the truth of the supernatural for,
Amen.
The conservative side of this thing.
I totally agree. Well, that's why we do what we're doing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is some fascinating stuff. one of the things that we came across, and I'm going to throw this out there just because I think this is mind-blowing, and let me know if you think this is like way over the line. We had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to go to Albuquerque for the International Symposium on Archaeology and the Bible, and it's led by the archaeological team at Trinity Southwest University and Veritas International University, Dr. Stephen Collins, Dr. Gary Byers, and others. They've been digging at the site in Jordan across from Jericho called Tal El Hammam since about 2005. And they've compiled a wealth of scientific evidence that's convinced Sharon and me that this is the site of Sodom. They caught a lot of flack for it because the skeptics say they're just trying to prove the Bible. Other Christians say, well, it's in the wrong place. It's northeast of the Dead Sea. It should be southeast of the Dead Sea. Others say the carbon-14 is in the wrong time because you're saying 1700 BC, and everybody knows Abraham lived to 2000 BC. Instead of looking at this site that was 8 to 10 times bigger than Jerusalem, was important enough for an enemy to march all the way from modern-day Iran to go to war against it, and was destroyed by a blast from the sky that leveled everything in the Jordan Valley north of the Dead Sea. They estimate the wind speed that hit this city sitting on a hill about 8 miles northeast of the Dead Sea at about 700 miles an hour. I mean, that's like 3 times more powerful than the most powerful tornado ever recorded. And the two skulls that they found by I don't know if that's been published. I can't talk about that. They did find on the destruction layer at that city a white crystalline substance that was appearing every morning as they got to the site. It was leaching to the surface in the morning dew, and when they sent it off for chemical analysis, they found that it matched the composition of the salts and sulfates in the Dead Sea water 8 miles away. Exactly. So now suddenly you've got a scientific explanation for Lot's wife. But as I was, Sharon and I have been fascinated with that aspect of the story of Sodom because of the high number of dolmens that were found at the base of the city, and the fact that Moses and the Israelites got sucked into the worship of Baal Peor there, who appears to be a god of the underworld. And God was so angry about that he sent a plague that killed 24,000 Israelites. So God destroys the city for some reason. I don't think it had anything to do with their alternate lifestyle. And then 400 years later, when Moses and the Israelites start worshiping this God there at that site, which is surrounded by these megalithic monuments for the dead, and according to Psalm 106, it's because they're eating sacrifices offered to the dead, God sends a plague that kills 24,000 of them. And then Ryan Pitterson the other night, as I was talking to him, mentions this as he was looking through Deuteronomy 32, which was the Song of Moses that he sang before he died. And it was sung right in this region because they were at the plains of Moab just before he climbed Mount Nebo. And there are scholars going back now to Nelson Glick, who was one of the first archaeologists in the Holy Land after World War I. Actually, this was during World War II, October of 1943. He wrote a paper where he suggested that this site, Tal El Hammam, was the location of Shittim, where Moses and the Israelites camped. So in other words, they may actually have been camping up on the hill on top of where this temple was located, where, according to the archaeologists digging at the site, the 1,500 dolmens around the base were all oriented towards that temple. And then Ryan points out in Deuteronomy 32, verse 31, God condemning Israel for their unfaithfulness, for their rock is not as our rock, and that's capital R rock, talking about the rebels. Our enemies are by themselves, for their vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. Now again, Moses is singing this while they're on top of the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Whether he knew that, we don't know. Their grapes are grapes of poison. Their clusters are bitter. Their wine is the poison of serpents and the cruel venom of asps. And the word serpents there is tenanim, dragons. So, God perhaps prophesying an end to the rebellion and saying that those who have aligned against him are drinking of the poison of dragons. Now, is that perhaps stretching it a little bit? Is maybe Moses being picturesque in his language as he's equating rebellion against God to the poison of dragons?
Well, so having not heard this before, but knowing the song fairly well, this song is really supernaturally charged. So this is the song with the sons of God. The whole Deuteronomy 32 worldview comes early in it.
Right.
You've got verse 17, him talking about these demons that weren't here before, and then the language that you brought up of the rock and the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
So the rocks are the gods. And then you have the language of angels coming later, I think verse 43, that Mike's also done a study on with the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Rejoice with him, O heavens, bow down to him, all gods. Yeah.
Right. So the whole thing is, from start to finish, supernaturally charged. There's just no doubt about that. So I would say that would be at least something in favor from the context to at least think about that idea.
Sure.
I mean, in Ezekiel 32, Ezekiel compares the Pharaoh of Egypt, the king of Egypt, to a dragon in the Nile.
Yeah.
And in Ezekiel 29 as well.
And we've talked about that relationship between the king and the gods before, so there's that aspect of it as well.
Yeah. Can I, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit too about the serpent motif, through Exodus, and Numbers. But of course, I just wrote my novel, Moses Against the Gods of Egypt. So I did a lot of research on Egypt and its supernatural context. And there's just some fascinating stuff. And, a lot of this stuff we already know, a lot of people know, but when you find out a lot of the Egyptian background, it also sort of enlightens things, like, for example, Moses' staff, right? We all know that story. It's really fascinating such. But it's not just that it was like a staff of a shepherd, but that there's a very distinct connection, I think, going on there, that the Pharaoh himself was actually depicted and sometimes actually did have two things. He had a mace and a staff that he would hold, the staff as the shepherd, but also, and the mace as king, right, of his people. But the staff has to do with a reference, I think, to Pharaoh. And when, Moses throws this down and his staff eats the snakes, it's interesting because in the text, it doesn't say that his snake ate the snakes. The word is staff. His staff ate the snakes. And I think so there's a deliberate, not saying that it wasn't a snake, but I'm just saying there's a different literary thing going on there saying that it's literally showing that, Moses' authority swallows up Pharaoh's authority because that kingship is, represented in that staff. And not only that, but there's the other elements of the, the gods, multiple gods of Egypt were depicted as holding these snakes out, which is also a Canaanite imagery as well. We know Asherah and stuff, but they look like wavy staffs, and that was also an expression of deity as well. But it's interesting because that. What was I going to say? That Moses staff, I don't remember, but that's another element where I think that there are, when we get to the fiery serpents and we get to the bronze Nehushtan, when they're complaining in Numbers 21, we want to go back to Egypt. So God gets angry and he sends these, fiery serpents, right? And they're killing by tens of thousands of people, right? And the Pharaoh, the Uraeus was the cobra that would go on the Pharaoh's, crown. And it was a symbol of Wyatt, the cobra goddess who protected Pharaoh. So it's a very much of a connection between Pharaoh as well with that serpent. And so it's sort of like, oh yeah, you want to go back to Egypt? Well, here's your God that you want to go back to. and he's biting them, So it's like, it's really cool to see how, again, there's the serpent imagery is highly polemical all throughout the story of Moses. Then when he does the bronze Nehushtan, he puts the bronze snake on there, and some even believe it had wings because there was that whole winged snake thing. And it's interesting because there's a couple components there. The standard was also a common expression in Egypt as well as other places, but of the deity. It was supposed to be a repository of the power of the king. And not only that, but they believed in sympathetic magic, where if you were to create, something like like a scorpion, it would protect you against scorpions, that kind of a thing. So God is like using, their concepts and their image to actually bring about his own healing. You look to the serpent, you'll be healed. There's that sympathetic magic. Now, I'm not saying that God is sympathetic magic. I see this clearly as God's using their imagery, and he's mocking it in a way, but he's also using it to he's using their own ignorance against them, I would say. In other words, you have to realize they've come from 400 years of Egyptian slavery. Most of them are thinking like Egyptians, right? So God is like using their notions and understandings to punish them and then to heal them, to point to him, And, there was one other element too that I was getting to, the serpent thing as, the deity, the serpent. I was mentioning how the gods would sometimes be depicted as holding these serpent staffs as well. That harkens back to Moses' staff, that again, not that Moses was a deity, but that God is using those understandings of deity. And it's like he's saying, Moses is my spokesman of deity to be superior to Pharaoh, your deity that you worship, So that's that polemical motif that I think God uses a lot throughout the Bible.
The serpent, just what does the serpent symbolize? And something that is kind of a basic question, but there's a lot of things that this creature has been used to symbolize. And you talked kind of about power and authority there. The idea that the serpent, the snake, sheds its skin is a picture of rejuvenation and renewal. So it becomes this image of life from death. Going to the way that Mike kind of thinks about Genesis 3:1 and using the verbal form of Nahash and as this divination sort of thing. So magic is super closely associated with them. And you just brought up the quality of magic there, Brian. Reminds me of Galatians 3:1, something that people don't often think about, but it says, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? And the word bewitched there is beskaino, from where we get basilisk. And so if you think about Harry Potter, and the one where the snake looks at people, or you think about going older to Medusa and the power that it has to turn people into stone. I mean, magic has been associated with the creature for a long time. And of course, that's the other world, the other realm. So, and there's a lot of things that are going on with it that makes it more than just that kind of simple idea that, you said has become so cliche when we talk about the serpent. It's so much deeper than that.
Yeah.
In Numbers 21 and parallel verse in Deuteronomy, you get the flying fiery serpent. And the words there are Seraph Nakash. Nakash is the serpent, the word translated serpent in Genesis 3. Seraph is believed to be the root behind seraphim and perhaps from a verb that means to burn, hence flying fiery serpent. Yep. Yeah. So, again, Sharon and I admitted that this was speculation in our book, suggested, hey, look, what else would you call a flying fiery serpent? But other than a dragon. But is it possible that the seraphim were serpentine in appearance? The only place we get any description of them is in Isaiah chapter 6, his throne room vision, and he's just mentions them as the six-winged creatures, which some scholars have identified as a fanciful version of the uraeus, because the hooded cobra, the hood looks like it's divided into 3 sections on each side, so 6 wings. I think that's being somewhat condescending to the Hebrews, that they didn't know what they were looking at. Oh, look, flying fiery serpent. Oh, no. Yeah, right. No, wait, no, it's just a hooded cobra. Sorry, our bad.
Yeah.
Is it possible that the word dragon actually means, that some of these supernatural entities are dragons? And I add to that some of the research that's been done into DMT, ayahuasca, this so-called spirit molecule.
Yeah.
Dr. Rick Strassman famously did that study, and I forget if it was Arizona or Arizona State, but where volunteers took it intravenously. But there have been a number of papers that have been published within the last couple of years of people who were snorting it or whatever, and then reportedly seeing entities. A very high percentage of the volunteers were seeing entities, and many of them were reptilian. Now, is it because that's what we've been conditioned to see? If we're seeing aliens, they're going to be Greys and Nordics and reptilians, or is it that they're actually seeing something that exists outside of our normal perception?
Well, so you brought up how the scripture really only gives the one description in Isaiah, but there's a lot of pseudepigrapha that actually talk straight to this, and a lot of people don't know about them. So I'll read a couple of them. They're really interesting. There's one that's called the Testament of Amram. It's fragment 1 from manuscript B, and it says, I saw watchers in my vision, the dream vision. 2 men were fighting over me, saying something, and then it's like it cuts off. And then then it picks up and goes, holding a great contest over me. I asked them, who are you, that you are thus empowered over me? And they answered me, we have been empowered to rule over all mankind. They said to me, which of us do you choose to rule you? And I raised my eyes and I looked. One of them was terrifying in his appearance, like a serpent. His cloak many-colored, yet very dark. And I looked again, in his appearance like the visage of a viper. And then you've got in the book of Noah found at Qumran, it describes them as having bodies that are whiter than snow and redder than a rose. Every hair is white and curly and glorious. And then in the book of the secrets of Enoch, it says, they appeared to me 2 men very tall, such as I've never seen on the earth, and their faces shone like the sun, and their eyes were like burning lamps. So there's your seraph idea. Fire came from their lips. Their dress had the appearance of feathers. Their feet were purple. Their wings were brighter than gold. Their hands were whiter than snow. And then the last one is from the Apocalypse of Abraham, where it's talking about, curiously, the devil is the chief of the fallen angels whose portion is the earth. And then it says he's depicted behind the tree of knowledge, standing something like a dragon in form, but having hands and feet like a man's, on his back, 6 wings on the right and 6 on the left. So you've got a whole smattering of Jewish speculation. I don't know. Is it ayahuasca they're doing? I don't know. How do they know this? But they're talking about it, and they're all using similar kinds of ideas for some group of creatures that are on the other side of this that are definitely exactly along the lines of what you're talking about, Derek.
This goes back to Mesopotamia, though, because the Mesopotamians had the idea that the serpent, there was a number of entities, like you mentioned Ningushita, but there are other serpentine entities in the ancient world. Even the sacred animal of Marduk was a lion dragon. The giants in Greek cosmology, at least after the 4th century BC, were depicted as having like serpents for legs in the Gigantomachy. Typhon, the chaos dragon, was, had like 100 snakes for arms and stuff. So this was a motif that appeared a lot in the ancient world, like the bison imagery for the gods in the ancient world too. That was a common theme. So again, is it just a story that was popular because it was really cool, or is somebody see something and shared that story, or was this just a motif because this is how these entities actually look?
Well, that's by the way, I think I brought this up before, and that's one of the things that does, just to be honest, that's my one troubling aspect is I said this earlier that it's almost serpent imagery is exclusively negative throughout the Bible, except for the seraphim. And like, so if we do take it in context, like we're implying here, whatever, thinking, how do you wrestle with that? I mean, because the good seraphim before God are serpentine in some way. Maybe they're not serpents, but there's some serpentine element to them. And then how do we then understand that? Because I've got such a negative vibe whenever I read serpents. And then when I honestly, when I read that in the Bible, it gives me a negative vibe, and I'm wondering, how do you guys understand that? I mean, I could come up with look, the mind is very, very flexible in terms of justifying, and I can come up with a good explanation, and it's not false, but I can, same thing along the lines of, well, the watchers weren't all bad, so some watchers fell, but then why is all the other serpentine imagery throughout the text always negative? I'm finding it hard to understand that. It's not a contradiction in my mind. It's just it's certainly a difficulty that I don't quite know how to address it.
The depiction of the serpents and dragons was not necessarily negative in ancient Mesopotamia, but you're right. In biblical, to the Hebrews anyway, it seems to have a pretty negative connotation. And human nature being what it is, I think most of us are at least a little uneasy around snakes. They don't give off the same sort of vibe as like a bunny.
Could it simply be, like the best analogy I find could be, Aslan, that whole famous statement, is he safe? Oh no, he's not safe, but he's good.
Right.
So there's that mutual, that there's a dangerous side, and that's what that image is. And so there's that kind of duality, but since the world itself takes on to worship that Ophidian concept or imagery, then maybe it's like, I'm saying, like it's maybe the text is, it's this worship is an idolatry, and we'll use that imagery negatively against the worship, but that doesn't mean that there can't be some kind of reptilian form of these heavenly creatures who worship God. I don't know. That's
well, and again, as Mike
go ahead, Derek.
No, I was just going to say, Mike pointed out in his analysis of Nakash that the word, just beyond meaning just serpent, also has, as Doug said, the connotation of divination, but also of gleaming like polished brass. So you've got this idea that seems consistent with the Seraph Nakash, a radiant, glowing, almost fiery being, who again may have serpentine appearance.
So, I like what you said, Brian. Like, instead of just going to kind of the simple thing of, well, okay, some of the seraphs are serpentine and they're good, and that's why. But that doesn't really answer the question of why is it so negative. So what if the idea is something along the lines of this is, and I think about the Ouroboros with the Milky Way. So the Milky Way, the idea that this is the great serpent eating its tail. And where is that? That's out there. That's in that realm up there. And then you think about all the serpent imagery associated with the underworld. And where's that? Well, that's down there. Neither one of those are here. And so whenever you think about this, what's going on with serpent worship, it's worshiping something in the underworld or something in the hosts of heaven. And add to that then the idea of magic and sorcery and that kind of otherworldly wisdom. And it seems to me that maybe what you have going on is some kind of a crossing over, and something that it's good in its own realm, but you're not staying in your lane. And so because they didn't stay in their lane and we didn't stay in our lane, the serpentine imagery becomes a negative thing because it's bleeding over into this space where it doesn't belong.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we have DVD on this show. Because of the brilliance of explanation. Really, I thank you. That's a very helpful way to put it.
I think that's right on. Let me throw this out, and this may be, just an illustration of the dangers of trying to do Bible study with Strong's Concordance. The Greek word translated dragon is drakon, but it derives apparently from the Greek derkomai, which means to see or the seeing one.
To see. That's right.
I mean, are we going too far here to say, yeah, the Greeks understood that the dragons were, dare I say, watchers?
Yeah, or even going back again to the idea of prophecy, Sibyls, the oracles, and all the serpentine imagery.
Well, yeah, the Pythia, right,
things.
Right.
They're seeing things because they're coming from the other world, you know?
Yeah.
The oracle of Pythia, the python that Apollo had to slay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Somebody give Van Dorn a PhD on that, will you?
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Well, that is good stuff. I mean, obviously this is speculative because none of this is explicit in Scripture, but there are verses, and Doug, Isaiah 34 is a classic example of where our modern translations have kind of smoothed out those weird rough edges that might lead people to drift towards believing that Greek mythology was real or something. But the truth is there is overlap between what the Greeks and Romans and Canaanites and Babylonians and Akkadians believed and what the Hebrews believed. It's just the Hebrews had a different perspective on those gods, and so did the early church. When you read the early church fathers, it's clear that they knew that Zeus and Apollo existed, but they're fallen angels. And the giants.
I was looking up this Gnostic heresy of Ophis, I think is what it was called. Something along those lines. Tertullian and Irenaeus and those guys all write about it. Hippolytus. We don't know much about it, but it's really interesting that they sort of it's typical Gnosticism where they kind of bleed the truth in with the lie, and they end up almost seeing the serpent and Christ as the very same thing. And it just becomes this weird, crazy, perverted, but yet close enough sort of a thing that they're able to capture all these, Christians and bring them into the dark side. I got to say this because I was, this is a soapbox of mine, the Isaiah 34 and 13 thing. It drives me nuts because in this case, I'm going to say this very strongly. The ESV has no business translating the way that it does. And the reason why is because we have an inspired commentary from John in Revelation on that text. And this is what it says.
Yeah.
Revelation 18:2. He called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become what? A dwelling place of demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean detestable beast." It's not that it's wrong to translate all of them. It's like you don't have to translate all of them bad as supernatural because they're not all that way. There are definitely unclean animals and birds in it, but John is telling you that there are unclean demons, and he's literally using these texts to get you there. If we only knew how to read Revelation in light of the Old Testament, we might get that sort of a thing.
Excellent point.
I am highlighting that for when we get that far in our Unraveling Revelation series.
Yeah.
153 episodes in, we're only up to Revelation 15. So, but we started with Genesis 1 because you can't get to the end of the book and understand it if you don't start with the beginning. And you're right; it's pretty clear. John knew what Isaiah and Ezekiel and Zechariah had written because it's clear. That's really good. Stealing that. This is fascinating stuff. We just look forward to the day when we understand it fully, which probably will be, in the new earth when I'm hoping, and I know Sharon is too, that we get jobs in the archives so that we can just spend eternity just reading the scrolls.
Yeah, a lot of ancient scrolls that I want to be able to read. Yeah.
The Library of Gondor where Gandalf goes.
Yeah, Alexandria. Well, by the way, though, still talking about that Isaiah 13 and Revelation, by the way, the context of that passage is judgment on Babylon, and these are animals of the wilderness, of the desert, and we talked about how the desert was the place of chaos where Azazel was as well, right? And these are it's almost like if you read it, it's like he's saying, Babylon, I'm thinking of Isaiah 13, Babylon, you are a demonic force and the demons are going to dance on your grave, because that word for wild goats, which, is satyr, right? Well, there are other passages in Leviticus where it's translated better as like goat demons. In other words, from the eyes of the Hebrew, to them, yeah, your satyrs that you worship, they're goat demons, Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like saying, yeah, these demons that you worship and that is everything that you are, they're going to dance on your grave, which is kind of like the way we say, like in today's political environment and such, where, if you give into the mob, if you try to appease the mob and you just think that the alligator is going to eat everyone else, but you're going to be the last one that it eats, and that's kind of the same concept there, So I find that, and so the point being that then Revelation is where it comes out more clearly. These are, the demons are dancing on Babylon.
That gets back to something that Sharon and I have been doing some reading on here of late, and this gets back to Bashan and the significance of Jesus choosing not just to reveal his divinity at Caesarea Philippi, but actually beginning his ministry there at Bethany across the Jordan, at Bashan across the Jordan. Isaiah 40, verse 3 is translated, it's quoted differently in the New Testament than it's written in Isaiah. Isaiah writes, "A voice cries, 'In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God.'" The voice isn't out in the wilderness crying out. The voice is saying, make straight the road through the wilderness. And when you combine that with Isaiah 9 and the prophecy that Matthew says Jesus fulfilled when he moved to Capernaum, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them a light has shone, or deep darkness of dwelt in the land of the shadow of death. Matthew said that that was fulfilled when Jesus moved to Capernaum. But again, when he called his disciples from the north shore of the Sea of Galilee, Bethsaida, which was in that region across from the Jordan, surrounded by dolmens, and then from there, Satan took him into the wilderness and then took him up a very high mountain to show him all of the kingdoms of the earth. All of this, it seems to be a battleground, but is it possible then this wilderness related to Babylon is also connected to ancient Bashan and where Jesus began and declared his ministry and declared his divinity?
It's interesting. Yeah, I think about as I've been going through Isaiah, he talks about over and over this road. There's going to be a road from Egypt to Assyria, that kind of a thing. And so I'm pretty sure that road's not going along the coast. It seems to me like the idea is exactly what you just said. Like it's going to go in these places that this path is going to be made straight, and that would be right through the wilderness. So,
yeah.
Well,
which is
something just struck me that Via Maris, that Gentile of the nations, with the way of the sea, which Isaiah writes about. But where did Paul have the scales fall from his eye? Where did he have his Damascus Road experience?
It's on the road to Damascus, yeah,
which went right through Bashan.
Israel. Yeah, he has to have been somewhere in that area, doesn't he? That's wild.
Huh. Going to have to look up those verses and see if we can pinpoint where that took place. But that's where the road would have gone. The road that ran, connected to the Via Maris, ran right past Caesarea Philippi and Dan, and then went through Damascus onto Mesopotamia. Well, as you can see, you've been following this freewheeling conversation. This is what we do, digging into the Word, and every time we do, there's stuff that pops out that makes us go, "Why?" That I'm pretty sure that wasn't in there the last time.
Boom.
Yeah. Before you finish it, I'll give you this just maybe to put in the background of the Charlesworth thing. So the way that Dean ends his book after all this discussion of serpent worship all over the world, and he's been talking about these things called dracontia, which are serpentine-shaped temples. So they would be anything from a circular stone that then it has winding stones around it that are all over the world to, some features that are like that. And he goes, the existence of dracontia proves the ancient prevalence of serpentine worship, and the prevalence of such an idolatry proves the truth of Holy Scripture. And then he says, this universal concurrence of traditions proves a common source of derivation. And the oldest record of the legend must be that upon which they're all founded. The most ancient record of the history of the serpent tempter is the book of Genesis. And the book of Genesis, therefore, is the fact from which almost every superstition connected with the mythological serpent is derived. I don't know that modern scholars would appreciate that, but as a Christian guy who's doing this kind of work 200 years ago, that was kind of his starting point, and that was his finishing point too.
It's interesting when you look at the work of the archaeologists who went into the field in centuries gone by, literally with a Bible in one hand and a spade in the other. And to an extent, some of the most successful archaeologists today are doing the same thing. But we've had a lot of fun reading through Palestine Exploration Fund reports from the mid to late 19th century.
You might be the only person that's ever said that in history of the world there, Derek.
I mean, there's a dig going on in Jordan along the Zarqa River, which is south of the Sea of Galilee. It's the river along which Jordan wrestled with the angel of God. And apparently there's a temple that they've dubbed the Temple of the Serpents in that location that dates back to the end of the Chalcolithic period, so around 4000 BC. So again, and I've got some other papers that I've saved as we're planning on writing something at some point when we have time about Bashan and its importance. In fact, it may go into our book that we're working on now. All through the Jordan Valley, you've got prehistoric artifacts that suggest that the serpent was an object of veneration for a long, long time before the Israelites were even, long before God called Abraham from southern Turkey. This was a thing in the Holy Land. So, and when you go back to ancient Eridu and the city of Ur, going back to what was that period of history? Forgetting the name. It's a pre-Uruk period. But anyway, those Ophidian figurines, those things that look like little lizard people, but they're bipeds and they're doing mammalian things like mothers suckling a young. I mean, that's not something snakes normally do, but they're called Ophidian because they are snake-like, and they're found in and around the ancient temple of Eridu, which was the temple of the god Enki, who was the lord of the Abzu, the abyss. So again, all we can do is speculate because they didn't leave us any notes as to why they made all these little things and why they looked so creepy. Giorgio Tsoukalos has the answer, of course. They're aliens.
He's got it on a lapel pin right here.
Not saying it's aliens, but
on.
Yeah, it's aliens.
What season is it? 15, 16?
15,
They have to just be doing the same things over and over and over. What else can they be doing?
Well, just making up more stuff.
One of the critics, a secular critic who I cited in the book about the UFO phenomenon, Jason Colavito, who's not a believer as far as I can tell. He probably wouldn't be happy that I cited his research quite heavily in a Christian book, because I thought he connected the ancient aliens thing to the writing of H.P. Lovecraft very well. Anyway, he very, very wise. I think he put it very well that ancient aliens long ago stopped being about the UFO phenomenon and essentially just has been shilling for theosophy for the last 8 or 10 seasons. And he's right. He's right. Because really, that's what Ancient Aliens is all about. It's just shilling for theosophy. But even there, you get the reptilians. So, fellas, thank you for taking time out of your schedules to do it. Brian, we'll be keeping you in prayer. We'll keep praying for Judd. But boy, when my son Hunter hits, it's going to be interesting. I was looking at some of the comments and some of the just on the trailer in the liberal media, the Daily Beast and Newsweek.
And I just want everyone to know that I will never commit suicide. You guys need to know that.
Yeah.
And I say it jokingly, but it's actually true. I never would. But it's just, the world that we live in,
We're dealing with dark stuff.
Yeah, who knows?
We're dealing with serpentine stuff is what we're dealing with.
Yes. And the FBI raids every political enemy with the Bidens, so who knows what's going to happen. We'll see.
Yeah, well, did you see what happened with Marjorie Taylor Greene a couple nights ago?
Yeah.
Well, so in the middle of the night, the cops show up, but they don't have any lights on or anything.
Right.
She was
swatted. Yes, I did
swatted.
see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be dangerous because if they think that you're coming out and they say that you had a gun and
right.
Yeah, that could be a tragic. Yeah, you're right. These are dark times, and the principalities and powers behind the scenes, they have no love for any of us, even the dupes that are serving their purposes. Yeah. So, well, fellas, thanks very much for your time. We look forward to doing this again next month. We're going to talk about movies, television shows, and their representation of the spirit realm. That should be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Our homework is to watch movies, so how bad can that be?
Oh. All right. Fellas, God bless you. We'll talk to you next month. Check our show notes at VFTB.net or wherever you're consuming this podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, that's great. Please click the button, subscribe, and share with your friends. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/Gilbert House. But the best way to get this program and all of the video content that comes from the Gilbert House, literally, we've got 4 rooms now dedicated to recording video and or audio, is the Gilbert House mobile app. It is absolutely free, available for iOS, Android, Amazon Kindle Fire phones and tablets, and it is maintained by a Christian company, which means they will not censor us. So if we happen to say something on Sci Friday, for example, that the medical gatekeepers don't like, which has happened in the past, a couple of those shows have been yanked, even though it turned out that, we were right. You will still see it on the mobile app, and it also powers our Roku and Apple TV channels. You can find information about all of that at the website, VFTB.net or gilberthouse.org. Just check the top menu bar. All the websites look pretty much the same, using the same template for all of those to make it easy for Sharon and me, because we record and produce all of the video content, maintain our own websites, run the store. I'm the one who takes the stuff from the store to the post office every morning. So we appreciate things like that make our lives easier. But anyway, check the notes for Doug, Brian, and Judd's web links, and keep an eye out for My Son Hunter coming in just over a week. This ought to be interesting to see how the mainstream media deals with that. Well, we've got a couple of conferences to tell you about. Actually, one to tell you about, as it is coming up in just a month. It's almost incorrect to call it a conference. More accurately, Advanced Supernatural Warfare Training. That's the official title of the weekend. We'll be gathering together in Sharon's old stomping grounds, really just downriver from where she grew up in Madison, Indiana. This is just across the river from Louisville in Jeffersonville, Indiana, October 14th through 16th. This will be at David Heavener's church. He purchased an old church building, and he's using it to produce his video content there. And he will be one of the speakers, along with L.A. Marzulli, Tom Dunn of Through the Black Ministries, gentleman who learned at the side of Russ Dizdar for many years. And this weekend is really in honor of, in memory of, Russ and Shelley Dizdar. Vicki Joy Anderson, author of the new book, They Only Come Out at Night, about sleep paralysis, Sonda Allison, Tracy Tennant, and Sharon and me. You can find out more at hearthewatchmen.com. But if you're in southern Indiana, northern Kentucky, southwest Ohio, Cincinnati area, it's really not that far. Even southeast Illinois, say around Carmi, Harrisburg, just hop on 64, shoot across to the Louisville area, and you're there. Again, all the information online at hearthewatchmen.com. We communicated a bit with Lipkin Tours recently, and we are starting to see some good numbers signing up. We've got more than one full busload already for our tour of Israel, March 19th through 30th of 2023. You can get information there at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel. Which includes a couple of links to the videos that we produced, our travelogumentaries following the tours in 2018 and 2019. So you can rent them. We've got a new streaming video site, a video on demand site, where you can rent those for 7 days, watch in full HD as we take you through the Holy Land. The 2018 tour also goes over to Sardinia and shows you the tombs of the giants there. And you can rent those for as little as $3 for 7 days. So to give you an idea what a tour of Israel is like when you go with the Gilberts. Again, more information online at gilberthouse.org/travel. travel. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to listen or watch wherever you are consuming this podcast. Please remember, the audio-only version of the podcast is just about everywhere that podcasts are distributed. Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our announcer is DC Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House and released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.